The faculty, staff, and students of St. Bonaventure University present Sunrise, a new era for media and politics, a podcast focused on today's dynamic political landscape.
Welcome to Sunrise, a podcast series on the changing dynamics of media and politics. My name is Rich Lee. I'm a professor in the Jen Doley School of Communication. I'm also executive director of the Jen Doley Institute. And with me today to kind of unpack this complex topic are Dr. Phil Payne, chair of the history department here at St. Bonaventure, Holden Turek, a political science student. I'm so used to saying professors, I was going to promote you there. And
maybe it's a promotion, maybe not.
And Aaron Schimmel, the dean of the Jen Doley School.
Dean is definitely a demotion.
So thank you all for joining me on this day after the election. And, we're still kind of looking at the numbers from last night, but I think we can generally agree it seems to have been a good night for the Democrats. So I'd like to start out by getting everyone's impressions on what happened. So Phil, let's start out with you. What do you make of the results that we saw last night?
I mean, in a couple ways, I've been thinking about this like politics. You've heard me talk about this in other contexts. Yeah. Like we're in a realignment, right? Like I think there is kind of a moment where like politics and what was meant to be a Republican and a Democrat and a conservative and a liberal, that like when we were like 20 or 25 or 30 meant one thing. I don't think it means that anymore. And I think this election is sort of demonstrating that. And the other thing is, I think you're hearing a lot of commentary about like you have the centrist winning on the gubernatorial level, but Mamdani winning in the city. But I think there's always been like a difference. Like there's always been this element of going way back of mayors being the people, because of the type of work they do, the ones that sort of experiment with policy that has a really direct impact on people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, local government is that way. So we'll see what happens in New York City.
Yeah, tariffs are very abstract and distant. Yeah. Whether or not the bus is on time, that matters.
Yeah, I remember from working in a mayor's office, people don't think twice about walking into town hall and voicing their opinion, looking for people, yet they wouldn't do that in a governor's office or congressional office. So, that's true. Holden, your thoughts. I know you've been following the election pretty closely.
Yeah, I think it really shows the power of social media and how it has today. I think, especially at least my generation, we've grown kind of numb to the average headline, which is X candidate is evil, X candidate did this evil thing, X candidate is going after you. And social media is a lot more personable. It's a lot more individual, case-to-case basis. And I think that's helping not only candidates to get their actual platform out more, but it's also helping spread, because so many people are resharing, reposting things, and it's not just reading a headline, it's more like conversational with an individual person.
Yeah, social media can also be kind of nasty. Did you observe any of that during the...
Oh yeah, there's always nasty stuff, always some nasty Twitter posts, right? And there were a lot of, personal attacks I saw. I think especially with Cuomo was doing some nasty attacks to Mamdani. Not only during the debate, but also on social media,
Okay. And Aaron, I probably have the toughest question for you. Like we saw what happened, we see how things are changing. How do journalists react? How are they going to cover this changing world?
Yeah, I think for journalists, the thing is to always be looking forward. So I think there's a tendency to stop and try to look back a lot and figure out, okay, well, this is what happened here, so then we're going to apply whatever happened in the last election to the next election, versus looking at what is really going to be the issues, what's going to be the technologies, how is the public going to interact with the candidates in 2026, 2028, versus how it went in 2025. There are lessons, though, of course, from this, particularly how a relatively obscure candidate can all of a sudden become mayor of New York City. As Holden was talking about, using social media, engaging in different ways. But I think we also see there is definitely an appetite for new and different candidates, and not, there's certainly in the, Democratic Party, certainly an age divide. So a lot of this feeds to some of the things we've already kind of know about and have talked about. But for journalists, it's also looking, okay, what are going to be the issues? What are going to be the styles and what's going to connect with folks in the next couple of years and the next couple of elections.
Yeah, good. And that kind of takes me, back to Phil about, all the changes here and how significant are they? I know from working with you in the past, a lot of times something new will happen. It seems like when there's a successful candidate and he or she tries something new and it works, there's a lot of copycats there that say this is where we have to go in the future. But you can add some historical context about when new tactics have been implemented, and this is not the first time something like this has happened.
I think I think that happens a lot. I think that happens continuously. Like you see this over and over again with political parties adapting to how they kind of reach people. Like you see this with like late 19th century, the Front Porch Campaign, which were essentially media events because now all of a sudden they had a media ecosystem they could essentially reach the entire nation by keeping a candidate in one spot. And that was made possible by like railroads and newspapers and then early film. And you see this with FDR and radio. Like one of the stories there is FDR's good at radio. Herbert Hoover was terrible at radio. So yeah, this happens over and over again. And I also think too, like we talk about journalists and like looking for the next one. Like I notice that a lot with like punditry. They're like, oh, we saw it. And I think particularly punditry of a certain age, they're like stuck in like late 90s and early 2000s. And you could kind of like, no, if you want to do that, like you need to go further back. Like go back and look at, some of the mayors of the early 20th century, like talking about gas and water socialism and some of this is, in some ways, is a very similar vibe to Mamdani saying, we're going to improve light in the city by making things like access to clean water and sewer systems that work, which are incredibly not sexy. But if your city's overrun with disease and you don't have clean water, that's an important thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it goes back to, local government, local news. Okay. Aaron, one of the developments in journalism is kind of like, not the demise, but the cutback of local news as, more and more big media conglomerates buy more and more news entities. We're not seeing as much local news. I mean, do you see that coming back, or how do you see the, decline of local news affecting local elections?
Well, I think to Holden's point, the candidates have so many more ways to get their messages out now. And so they can bypass the media in a lot of ways. And that's, while that may be advantageous for the candidate, and certainly there is an element, as a, voter where you want to hear, directly from the candidate. But it's also important, and we saw this with Katie Porter, who's, running for governor of California, having a really contentious interview and being very uncomfortable. Like, why is this reporter asking me tough questions? Well, that's the reporter's job. But that's also, it's not because the reporter's doing it for, in that case, her own interest. She's doing it for the public interest, right? Is that here are important issues for the public to know and understand about, in this case, the governor's race in California. But so having that process and doing those interviews and having local journalists, particularly local journalists, because there's always going to be coverage of the national candidates and the national issues. But the real concern, to your point, is local news. And we've been talking about mayor's race, and there's mayor's race here in Olean and those sorts of things that I think that's really where you really need journalists, and where it is concerning to a lot of folks if there's not journalists doing that kind of accountability reporting and pressing candidates for their stance on the issues. Not just can you make a clever video on social media, but really what is your plan for this, and does it line up with the needs of voters? Is it is there a reality check to it? What have they said in the past? I mean, all these things that is the work that journalists do is really crucial, and really crucial in communities that are don't have a lot of journalists in them. And I think unfortunately we continue to see consolidation among media companies that's just going to exacerbate the problem. And that doesn't even get into some of the concerns with like television ownership and the FCC and pressures from the federal government that could force broadcasters to be more cautious in their reporting and what they cover. And so I think that's also, going to be a concern. On the flip side too, because candidates are able to get their own messages out through social platforms, they may be doing less advertising on television. And for local news, that and local TV stations, that advertising revenue is huge. And so it may not be, and I think a lot of folks would see that advertising being not as successful in terms of reaching voters, but yet for local news organizations, this paradox is you need that revenue from candidates to really help you achieve your business goals.
Yeah, I remember my very first job at a weekly in New Jersey. After Election Day, we all got bonuses because there was so much revenue coming in for that. And as you said, candidates now can get their message out directly. They can bypass the media, which is not a good thing. They're not going through that scrutiny that, what journalists do, holding people accountable. So let me switch to Holden for a second, because we're framing this race kind of as old style versus new style. Andrew Cuomo was a retail politician. He went to, fairs, festivals, talked with, the powerful people in the organization. Mamdani, as you said, was really big online. As Phil said, had a lot of energy. We could go all around. But we looked in our class, and, Holden is in a class with me where we're, studying campaigns. We spent the month of October tracking what the candidates were posting on TikTok versus what Legacy Meter was reporting. And can you tell us what you found? I think you saw a pretty big difference in the two.
Yeah, legacy media is keeping really that traditional idea, right? It's all politics. It's all what economic policies do they believe in? What political policies do they believe in? It's very, what you call politically straightforward, right? It's this person believes this. And you see in like TikTok, for example, which we were covering, it's a lot more, especially with Mamdani's campaign compared to Cuomo, it's a lot more personal. He's going around and he's, one video that really stuck out to me, I can still think of it, and I watched this probably maybe 2 weeks ago, is he's going around walking down streets, and he's getting rejected by people. People are like, I don't want to talk to you. And but eventually he gets people to talk to, and he talks and has a deep conversation, not even about politics, just about how are you? How's your day going? What are you worried about? And I think through social media, through those personal means, you can get a lot of that more personal connection, especially, it's just me on my phone scrolling. I feel a lot more connected to that person. When in a media platform, for example, it just feels like I'm reading a book, like I'm reading a documentary, right? I'm just learning. I'm not connecting. Social media has that really personal connection, I think, and that's really unique to that platform.
Oh, how do you think the skills that got him elected, the tactics, the activities, are going to translate when he becomes governor? There's a difference. Mayor. Maybe he will be governor someday.
Bold prediction here.
Is one skill set you need to run for office and be successful. It's different when all of a sudden you're the mayor, governor, president, whatever. You think it's going to work for him, or you think he's going to have to change his approach to governing?
Yeah, there's the Mario Cuomo quote. You've got, you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really hope it does work. I mean, for the sake of the city, I hope it works, right? And I think we've seen this level of personal or personality of being able to connect with people, which is important. But we haven't really seen, obviously, his background, right? Can he lead? Can he lead a city? Can he manage a city? And I think that's yet to be seen. And that's, a lot of thing Cuomo really attacked him on, and other candidates really attacked him on, is you have no experience. You've never done this before. And I think, however, that is what Gen Z wants, is that they want people who are from the outside, people that they can relate to, this sort of anti-establishment idea. I mean, we even saw it with Trump's election, right? With Trump's election, on 2016, he ran with this idea of being anti-establishment, being against the standard politician, a different outsider, right? This outsider idea. And I think a lot of modern politicians on both sides, young politicians, are trying to keep that momentum of being young, new, and, what do you call it? Fresh blood, fresh meat, as you call it, right? A new and against the establishment, or not a part of the establishment. I think that's really the idea.
Yeah. I always think it's funny that politics is the one field where not having experience is seen as a benefit. I'm not part of the Albany inside crowd or this inside crowd. I'm going to bring, as you said, that fresh blood. And his experience is in the legislative branch, which is a lot different from the executive. But before we move on to another topic, just Aaron, any thoughts on governing versus running? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different job. It's not the same thing. And there's lots of people who are great candidates, who, have compelling stories, who are engaging, but, then you meet the realities of governing. And even in New York City, I'm sure he's not going to be able to push through everything, every agenda item he wants to. And the question is, how does he respond to that, right? And then how do voters respond? Because we've seen, I think there's a widespread in this country frustration with voters, with candidates who said, well, you promised me you're going to do this and this and this and this. And then because of the realities of governing, they're not able to do the things that they promised. And then voters react negatively to that because, I voted for you because of this. You didn't do it. I'm not following politics every day, so I don't know why, the entire, great example right now in the Senate is like the filibuster. Like most Americans don't really have a sense of the filibuster and the, Senate rules and things like that. And so when you get to actual governing, and there's going to be a learning curve, right? From going from being, in a legislative body, on, statewide, but, you don't really have responsibilities for running things in that role to running the biggest city in the country. There's going to be a learning curve, and there's, always a learning curve for folks in those roles. And so for him, it's going to be, how does he, adapt to that? How does he achieve that? He's got, certainly personal gifts in terms of his energy and his charisma, and just how much of that, will transfer for him.
Yeah, he certainly set the bar high in terms of expectations. And I know during the campaign, one of the criticisms of him were that, he's promising things that are impossible. Yeah. But if you look at Donald Trump, he promised he'd have a wall built and it would be paid for by Mexico. And, it didn't seem to stop him from getting elected. So, yeah. So, Phil, you want to put a cap on this topic? Yeah.
With him, like I said, I guess one thing is you just see this floating around a lot. That we've been in this new Gilded Age. I guess the question is that we're now turning to a new progressive period, progressive age, and we're going to start seeing, like I said earlier, if he's successful, and we start seeing these ideas, which in some level I think is this is interesting to me because we talk about his ideas being big and bold, but I think in a bigger context are kind of not. And this is what I mean by that. The city universities of New York used to be free. They didn't charge tuition. And so we've had other periods of time when his proposals would have been very I'm making the buses cheaper and they're going to run on time. The grocery store one, which is to me sort of I have no idea how that works. I don't understand retail in New York City, but it seems like maybe what he's proposing, I don't know if he gets them through, but taxing the wealthy, whatever percentage is, if you compare that to say the New Deal and rural electrification, it's not so I think maybe this is he gets that room for experimentation, and maybe he doesn't build 5 grocery stores, but maybe something else comes out of it. So
okay, thanks. Great conversation. I'm sure we could spend another hour or so talking about New York City mayor, but there were some other elections last night, and 2 of them, New Jersey and Virginia, had their governor's elections off years. So there's always a lot of focus on them. People like to read into them. In New Jersey, my home state, Mikey Sherrill won, the Democrat won. For a while, it was looking like it was going to be close, but she won by a pretty comfortable margin. The Democratic candidate in Virginia won also, but I think of more significance in Virginia was Jay Jones, the Attorney General candidate, was hit with some, pretty tough issues, that he created himself by, making some, threatening comments, which were caught on text. His opponents tried to make a big issue of that. With Mikey Sherrill, she had gone to the Naval Academy, and apparently she was involved to some degree in a cheating scandal. And again, her opponent tried to make an issue of that, but it seemed to bounce off both of them. They both won, by wide margins. And I'm wondering, have we gotten to the point where we're immune to candidates' personal flaws and just looking at what they run? Holden, do you want to start that? Because I know we've been looking at some personal issues. I introduced our class to Gary Hart, who was a new person for all of them. But.
Yeah, I think we've kind of gained this desensitization I think broadly that's kind of happened where, again, going to an earlier point, like media has been, or just in general, social media and just all kinds of media has just been constant personal attacks. I remember during the 2024 election on the news or on the advertisements on the TV, they'd say, this candidate's dangerous. They're not set for our country. And I think you hear the word dangerous enough times, it kind of makes you crazy, right? Because what's really dangerous and what's not? And I think you kind of get desensitized to that. We hear like this candidate did this, or like, oh, whatever, I'm voting for my party. Or, oh, whatever, I know this policy I agree with, so I'm voting for it. And I think, yeah, that's sort of, I think that's what's happened, right? Is just we've heard it so many times. There's so many scandals. I can't even count how many there are. And it just becomes, like immune, right? We just become immune to it.
Yeah, I think we're aware of all those scandals now because of social media, the way they're covered. But Phil, I'm sure there were, folks who in elected office years and years ago who, were not the greatest persons. But I don't see that matters.
That's sort of. Yeah, I got like a big chunk of a book on Warren G. Harding scandals. Yeah, I mean, like these things used to derail things. Like it was like Ronald Reagan was the first president who had been divorced, and he had been divorced and remarried a long time ago. He sort of got a pass on it because he was in this long-standing second marriage. And then there's Gary Hart, like Clinton's impeachment. It wasn't that long ago that like especially these personal issues would really come back to the haunt a candidate. In a way that it just doesn't seem to be happening now. I guess the exception that pops in my head is whatever happens with Epstein, the serious Epstein files that we keep, maybe that derails something. But my guess is if those ever see the light of day, we'll have like a brouhaha, and then 2 days later we'll be moving on, because that seems to be what happens. Our attention span doesn't seem to last more than a couple of days.
One words, and many people, when we talk about this a lot, right, being in information silos, right? So you're only hearing based on who you follow on social media, or what cable news channel you watch, or what where you get your information. You're just getting that information, so you may not even be that aware of a scandal because it's not being talked about in your circles. And then you combine that with the polarization that we have. I think the Jay Jones race, the Attorney General race in Virginia, is really interesting because he's going to win by like 7 points. Like it's not even going to end up being that close in the end, which I think that's surprising. But I think obviously there were pretty long coattails from Spanberger, but you see that people are just so divided that I think it takes a lot if you are a partisan to say, I'm not going to vote for my candidate, for whatever, because no matter how awful whatever they did it is or was, I think the other side's worse, evil, whatever, to Holden's point, is so bad and dangerous that it doesn't matter. This doesn't compare.
I also think that, to build on that, like we've lost some of that slow burn components of it. You think about Watergate or heck, the Harding scandals or any of those. There's just like slow build up, and then at some point journalism keeps getting deeper and deeper, right? But on the other hand, Congress kicks in. Like and Congress just doesn't, at least in the very recent years, doesn't seem to have much of an appetite for like digging into these scandals, and in part because I think it's that erosion of the sense of it's that partisanship, right? Congress seems to lack that sense of independent institution as a Congress, regardless of party, so that if a president steps on congressional or legislative prerogatives in the past, Congress would have pushed back, irregardless of party. It would have been like, no, you can't do that because that's Congress's job or whatever. Yeah.
And of course, the class example is Barry Goldwater going to Nixon.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And, it's like
you're done.
You couldn't imagine a Republican senator, almost any one of them, going and doing the same thing today.
Yeah, I don't think it would happen. Like, and you could see this. There's other examples, like FDR when he had his court packing scheme, and it was actually Democrats who said, no, this is our job, not your job. Yeah.
Yeah. Aaron, I want to get back to what journalists do now. How do you balance what you cover when these personal issues arise And, those are the stories that are going to get the clicks. Those are the ones that are going to bring in the revenue, versus covering policy and what's really important to help voters make up their mind and choose the best candidate.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough balance, right? Because ultimately, right, the point of elections is to put people in positions that can make decisions that are going to affect our lives. So on one hand, the issues do matter, right? And that's really important. And I think the question for all of us, for voters, across the country is, does your personal conduct matter? And to what degree does it matter? And for journalists, it's, you can't ignore stories like that. And I think, some of them, I mean, the Jay Jones ones is pretty awful.
Yeah.
And that is a story. But if voters are saying that kind of conduct, or not that specific, but any kind of personal conduct is really not disqualifying, then you're kind of left to focus, on the issues. And I think maybe the bigger challenge is getting out of just focused on polls. And, what does a poll say versus actually what do actual voters say, doing interviews, being on the ground in places. And that's where, to the earlier point, where erosion of local news really hurts. That because you don't have as many journalists out having conversations in communities, talking with people about what's important and is going to affect their lives.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. We're nearing the end of our time now, and I wanted to wrap up by talking about the title of the series. It's called Sunrise, and a lot of people are probably wondering, why is it called Sunrise? And the idea was sunrise is a new day. I think we're in a new era of media and politics. Sunrise also doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good day, a bad day. So I'm going to ask you all to put on your meteorologist hats and in a word or two, if you had to describe the forecast for the future of media and politics, what would it be? So Phil, you're on the hot spot first.
I was going to go with fog. I want to switch to turbulence. I think we're just, it's to your point, like it's just constantly, we're talking about this now. I don't know what we're talking about next week. Yeah. And then, we're going to have just new mediums, maybe not next week, but this TikTok. Wasn't that long ago that TikTok showed up, and we'll see what's the Sora, the ChatGPT's competitor. We'll see what it does.
Okay, hold on.
I was thinking like an earthquake, but then I realized that wasn't really weather.
It may be accurate though.
Yeah. But I'll have to go with like a really windy day with like some clouds coming by, and every cloud is like this new thing that's showing up or happening. And it happens so fast. Like I can't keep track of what's going on. You can keep scrolling, but you can't see it all,
Okay. Aaron.
And so I don't know if you know this, so back in my earlier career,
You were?
I was a storm chaser. So I would say definitely stormy. But what's interesting about storms, particularly in Texas, is you might get bright sunshine. And so I think today Democrats are feeling, very sunny and optimistic. But that doesn't mean in, a few minutes, or in this case, a few weeks or days or months, there's not going to be storm clouds. There's not going to be, a lightning bolt or something that really changes the dynamic. So I think we are very much in a stormy period. And I think we should all expect, journalists covering it, as well as voters, that things are going to be changing a lot. And it's not going to be just, a nice, calm period.
Yeah, I was almost going to go with stormy, but I decided to go with cloudy because things are uncertain. Yeah. So we'll see. But Lee, we're out of time. So Phil Payne, Holden Turek, Aaron Schimble, thanks for joining me today. My name is Rich Lee. You've been watching Sunrise, a podcast series on the changing dynamics of media and politics. We'll be back again next week. You can view the podcast on the Jandoli Institute website at jandoli.net. Thanks everyone for watching, and we hope you see you next time.